Hey, I am sitting here with Pastor Joel. Joel, it's so good to be here.
Good to be here, Clint.
And I'm Clint.
Yes.
Yeah. How long ago did we meet?
Gosh, we met VBS of last year. Yeah.
I was actually given your name. I think I maybe texted you or reached out to you way before you were the pastor even here.
Right.
I think when you were still in the corporate world.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah, you wanted to use the facilities here to
That's right.
put your...
Well, hey, I'm a church planner, man. I beg, borrow, and steal.
There you go.
So
There
if you have a church, you have land or facility, I'm going to come at you.
Well, I appreciate it.
Well, you've been so generous to Eastown. You've been generous, to us, to me as an individual. And I love your approach to this work. I love what you do in the community. I love the bridges that you're constantly building, even with your literal neighbors,
Yes.
here. So let's talk, man. Let's talk because a lot is going on in our world. A lot is going on here in the Bay Area. A lot's going on in our nation. So.
Man, I appreciate this time, Clint, because it is a pretty tense time, right? And from my perspective, how did Joel go through it? I just like everyone else. Emotionally, I just got spent. You had COVID-19 we were dealing with, and as a pastor, trying to get comfort to your flock whom you can't touch. And then all of a sudden in May, we have racial issues within the United States, and that brought in a whole different thing. That brought in kind of a viewpoint of something that was going on all the time that we always were aware as a Black American, that things aren't fair.
Yeah.
I mean, there is the conversation we have with our kids at some age, and you don't know when that conversation is going to happen, but it happened with all three of our children. We had the conversation that the world itself is broken, and you will not be treated fairly, but Christ in you will get you through it. Mm-hmm. And so don't get in the defensive mode. Just understand that there are things that will come about, and so sure enough, each of them face different issues. And each child could give you their experience, and I can give you my own personal. I grew up on the Presidio, where it was a safe haven for us, because all of us on the Presidio, Army posts, we were treated the same. But then when I got off post in San Francisco, I knew I was Black. I can remember, so growing up in the 70s in San Francisco, being just stopped by police officers because you are Black. What are you doing in the Marina District, which is a very rich area of San Francisco at the time? So here I am, a teenager, big afro at the time, and walk into a friend's house. What are you doing here? And well, I live on the Presidio, so that kind of took them, they were okay when they heard that right away. Never had to show an ID or anything, but I stopped several times. When you go in a store, you're followed. So you kind of understood that. My buddies that lived in the Marina would just all laugh about it. That, all right, let's see who will follow Joel when we go in the store. It was just kind of we just kind of accepted it, right? And that's real. It's real.
So that's when you were early 20s, teenager?
This was teenagers. You're exposed as a teenager. And then as you get older, you then go to restaurants. I can remember in my 20s, about 3 or 4 couples, we go down to Monterey, and we all wanted to go to this club that was downtown Monterey. We were renting a condo, and we were specifically told we can't come in. We just couldn't come in. And we spoke to the manager, and the manager, he eventually let us come in. But still, it was kind of that whole thing that you had to convince him that we're okay. But he just judged us by the skin. And we got in and absolutely did not enjoy ourselves, because what is this about? Let's go back to the condo and let's have our own fun. And I can give you many instances of that. That's just part of life. You just accept it.
So you were a pretty big deal in corporate world. I like to say that.
Yeah,
I like to
that.
say, hey, Joel's my friend. He's a pretty big deal. But you worked yourself up through the ranks.
Yes.
And did you experience any of that even in the workplace?
Oh my gosh, yeah. But you have to stay focused again, right? It's about why are you there? And for me, I had one purpose, is make sure I did not, because I was always the first black. I was the first black that was a supervisor in the internal audit. I was the first black that became an officer in real estate.
Can I ask you a question real quick?
Yes.
How I've always wondered, like even like a Tony Dungy, like
Yes.
Tony, first black coach to win,
Yes.
you know, the Super Bowl.
Yes.
Is that bother you? Is that something that you are like, was that an honor to be first, or was it just
That's
like?
a great question.
Do you understand?
I never thought of it as an honor. I always thought of it as the opportunity to open the door for someone else.
Yeah.
That really was it, is that this is the first opportunity some of my associates are exposed to a black male. And we can come off intimidating.
Yeah.
You know, I had the height, but I never was the size, so I wasn't as intimidating as some.
Yeah.
And then some will justify. So here's one of the comments. It's kind of a backhanded slap at you. I think you and I talked about some of these comments you get, but someone will say, you know what, Joel, you don't sound black. And I would say, you know, you just, in trying to compliment me, you just insulted many of my relatives, because what does that mean?
Yeah.
And so what I love about what's going on now is just the awareness of people's actions. So being the first is okay, but you have to understand, in being the first, people don't know how to deal with you.
Yeah.
And so so what we would do, what I did, I just kind of owned, kind of educating them and changing their perspective of black male in corporate, wherever I was, right? Whether it's accounting or whatever, it was just.
Yeah, it's amazing your posture, and my first encounter with you is just like, this is one of the most gracious men I've ever been around, and I think sometimes what that can communicate is that there's no backstory really, like everything is good and everything is good. In your story, and Joe's story, your wife is, this stuff is still happening and still going on.
Still happening is right. I told the congregation here at Church of the Valley, it's right here in San Ramon. When we moved here in 2003, my wife was stopped by a police officer. Got her ID, got the registration, and then said, okay, ma'am, go on. What was that about? Black woman, it was 7 o'clock in the evening, maybe a little dusk, and stopped. And our son was in the car, so he got to witness this, and she was just a bundle of nerves getting home, between being angry just because this officer decided to follow her and stop her, to, just kind of sad that this happened. So you kind of deal with that emotion, and we've learned, back to your comment, I don't tell my story. We don't want to put a burden on anyone. And we don't want to play, if you remember, when you did it, and you see it in the sports world, that someone's playing the race card. And so all of a sudden you are there's a negative view of you when you do try and tell your truth. And so we've all learned. All of us learned. And now, again, what I love actually, is that the stories are being told. Yeah. And people are listening. Not everyone's listening. That's what frustrates me. That's what hurts me today, because the ones that aren't listening, that hurt me the most are the believers. Mm-hmm. Those who say that they believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, those who understand that there's nothing that we've done in life to do to earn the unmerited love and grace and mercy of God, and yet we don't extend the same to others and want to listen to the story of others.
As soon as we start saying Black Lives Matter, and as soon as we start raising the flag of like, look at what's happened to George Floyd, and look at what's happened throughout history, is immediately, it feels like to me, and maybe I'm wrong, educate me on this, that it's like, oh, you must be one of those on this far, I'm not going to say right or left, right? Or this far. It's like, why is that? How has it become that way?
I did a sermon on May 31st, and the title of the sermon is America, We Have an Identity Crisis. And the premise of that is that there was a survey done that said that 75% of Americans identify themselves as Christians. And then when you really dig into that and look at the behavior of people, it really is driven by their political party. You know, that one party is better than the other because it's closer to the Lord. And I consistently will tell people that 99.5 won't do. You're either 100% or you're not. And so any party that says they're closer to the Lord, is false. So that becomes an idol in your life. So why is this political? It's political because we're so divided as a church. And the division and the identity of churches have become a political party. And so when we now stand for Christ, we're divided. And how can that be? We're one body. So how can we be Republican, Democrat, Independent? Our identity is Christ. And so when you say something like Black Lives Matter, it becomes associated with some other party. And that's true. That's truly not it. I heard Tony Evans, I believe it was Tony that said this. He said, if you're going to fight for pro-life, fight from it from birth to grave. That's pro-life. And so we get so separated just because that one thing, pro-life. And we're saying Black Lives Matter. There is a movement of Black Lives Matter that isn't popular, but that's not what this is about. This is a social rights thing. This is a human rights thing that we all need to. Why believers don't embrace it, I just don't understand. And that's what gets me upset. Unbelievers, I get it. I totally get it. So when I get hurt, and I won't say it's anger, because I just want to go talk to them in love, to your point. That, my mission, because I watched the Lord do it, is to build the bridges. Let's talk about this. Let me hear you, but let me make the case. I recently asked one of our members, I said, all right, we have a decision to make here. You have a decision for us to have this conversation. Are you more American than a follower of God, of Christ? You let me know. And then the person struggled with the question and said, obviously, I'm about God first. I said, good, now we can have a discussion.
It's almost baked in there, isn't it? It's like I met a guy, and maybe you know this name is Greg Boyd. He wrote a book, I think it was in the early 2000, maybe 2007, 2008, called The Myth of a Christian Nation. And he wrote the book and lost the majority of his church because it's so, the God bless America, it's so nationalistic, it's so in us from when we are born that God is for only America.
Exactly.
And it's so hard to have a conversation with people and separate all the different aspects that are in that conversation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I look at America and I think, wow, it has become an idol for us as believers. America has become our identity. It's become what we worship.
Yeah.
And when we get there, when we are going to do all I can to fight for this thing, that's an idol.
Yeah.
And so we have to wake up to the fact that we have made America an idol. And not being anti-American, this is about being a better America. This is about in one God we trust. Yeah. And we know who that God is. And we're just going to show his, again, his grace and his mercy to this world.
One of the things that, I just answered some messages today on Facebook that was delivered to me, and it's always this defensive posture. And I'm like, that should be, this is what I teach my children even before this situation. It's like, if you're getting defensive about something, let that almost be an alert. Almost like you set a timer and this thing is going off to go, maybe I should investigate, or I have a choice here. And the next thing that comes out of my mouth, or the next reaction that I do, is it going to advance the kingdom, or is it going to halt it, or even start going the opposite direction?
Yes.
And you've got to go back to the life of Jesus and say, give me one situation that he was in where it was I could give you some situation where he was confrontational,
Yes.
but it was in a wholly discontent way. Like, this is unjust. This is the market. How they're treating this woman, how they're treating these people in the margins. That's what he got angry about. The right thing.
Yes.
But in every other situation, it was a fight for justice. It was a posture of grace. One of the phrases we always use is, let grace arrive first. We always want to arrive, especially white people, is like, we want you to hear our truth first. And I know that that's probably been very hurtful in this, not just in this situation, but throughout history.
Because everyone will bring up a parallel. So you talk about an injustice.
You can find whatever.
You can find exactly whatever you're looking for. And to me, this is a time to stop looking and just, to your point, just listen.
Listen.
Hear the story and hear it through the heart of God. Where would God want us to be? Would God want us to be divided as a people? And again, I'm focusing on the believers. If we, as a group of believers in Jesus Christ, if we can set the example how we are one, because what does the world look at? They're going to look at both sides. So I spend a lot of time listening to, because someone has sent it to me, about another black who says that there's no systemic racism. And I ask the person who sent, I always say, well, are you going to believe this person you don't know or someone you know, which I will tell you my story? And you have to make that decision. And so why we look for things to, just kind of things to go against what is so clearly happening in the U.S., I don't get it. Because it's not about being guilty about anything. It's about how do we move forward? Because we can't right any of the wrongs, but we certainly can take ownership of where we are today and how we move forward with our children and future generations. Because this generation, I told the congregation, I said, I won't see it arrive, but I really want to be part of building the momentum.
Yeah.
And that's what we are. So I do
That's
have a
good.
question for you, Clint.
Oh, no.
So what's an example of white privilege that you feel like, you know what, that's white privilege?
Yeah. I will tell you this. I was in a situation, and I was in a car, and my wife was driving, and my black friend was sitting in the back. And we were driving and we got pulled over. I convinced my wife to take a left turn where she shouldn't have taken a left turn. Still her fault. She was driving. Let's be honest. And she was pulled over, and the police officer came up and he started telling her, what she did, and she tried to explain herself, and I was inappropriate. And he said something to her, and she said something back. She goes, "I'm sorry, sir." And he goes, "Well, it doesn't matter. You still broke the law, blah, blah, blah." And I said to him, she's trying to explain herself if you would just listen. And then he looks at me and he fires something back at me, which I was in the wrong.
Yes.
But I said something to him and he said something back and I said something again. And my wife looks at me and she says, "What is wrong with you?" And I'm like, "He's disrespecting you and he shouldn't be like this and blah, blah, blah." And she got a ticket and we pulled away from there. And my friend says to me, he says, "I have never been in a car for even just a license check or anything and my black friend, not pulled out of the car and with my hands on the hood or immediately searched." He goes, "I didn't even know." He goes, "If I would have done anything like you just did." He goes, "Clint, I have friends that have gone to jail for less than what you just did right there." And it was just this was over a year ago. And that's when my journey began of privilege, like understanding just different privileges that I've had because of the color of my skin.
Right.
And so it's still unwinding some of those things that are intertwined so deeply in there. That's how I would describe privilege.
No, that is a great example, because that's the one example where when I talk about the talk, we have to tell, I have to tell my son, you get stopped. You give him your license, you give him the registration, you give him the insurance card, and no questions, and you just follow kind of what he says. That's it. You cannot talk back. As witty as you are, David, hold back on the whip. That's not the right time to do it.
How did your son receive that when you first had that talk?
He understood it. He was saddened by it because he realized, and he had to go through that stop on his own. And he's so funny because he went to De La Salle, big football school here. He played football. And so all of his buddies in the locker room say, if you just stop, make sure you tell them you go to De La Salle. That's just part of the brotherhood of De La Salle. David gets stopped one morning, rushing to weight training at 6 o'clock in the morning or something like that. And he did exactly what his teammates said. Just tell him you're headed to weight training at De La Salle and you'll be on your way. Wow. That didn't happen to David. He got his ticket, justifiably, right? He was over the speed limit, but he didn't get the same privilege and treatment that others did. And it was only one reason, the color of his skin. That was it. And that's just the real world. Hurt his feelings. It embarrassed him to tell his teammates that I got, because he was late. So he had to explain why he was late to coach. And it was like, you got a ticket? No. Yeah, he got a ticket. He was driving while black. That's just that's what we call it, driving while black. But that's kind of thing. And so emotionally, back to kind of why do I feel like there's hope here? It's that I'm watching the young folks that are getting involved, and not necessarily the people of color. It's the young, I'm going to say they're 18 and above whites that are getting involved. Locally here in San Ramon, they had and Danville, Dublin as well, I guess. But just the young people that are out there and saying, wait a minute, we want fairness for everyone. Yeah. I love that. So I believe there's a life to this that's never been, because there's many voices. And then the other part of this, which I really love, is watching corporate America. So I've been able to consult 2 different companies now, just really, some strong financial services companies on Black Lives Matter. And how do you deal with this? And how this is so different than diversity program.
Talk about that.
Yeah, so Black Lives Matter is all about, and I describe it, especially, we're all doing Zoom, right? And so I said, so here's all lives matter, and here's Black lives. And until we close this gap, all lives don't matter. Because you have this group down here. And let's close that gap. And I describe it to other blacks, that especially in corporate America, as you're coming up, you might pick up a Latino who still isn't in all lives. So as you rise up, there's others. And let's bring everyone up.
Bring them with you.
But right now, there's such a huge gap that Black lives do matter. Yeah. And it is nothing against our Latino brothers and sisters, Asian brothers and sisters, but there's such a gap we have to focus on.
Nobody's asking the question, I'm stealing this from T.D. Jakes. Yes. Nobody's asking the question, do white lives matter? That's not even in the conversation.
Isn't that amazing?
Right? Yeah. It's like, no, right now, it's like, do Black lives matter? Do they really matter? So we need to wrap this up. We've got, Joel, you have the problem, or you have the solution to all problems.
I have the solution. I have that. But that's the third leg of this thing. So young people are involved, corporate is doing it, and then the third piece of it is really the church.
The church.
The church. We're so divided. And I believe God is waking us up. And I think it was Rick Warren that said it. It's almost like with COVID-19, God said, I'm done. Kids, go to your bedroom. All of you, go to your bedroom. I'm shutting everything down. And so we started that in March, and then we have the racial issues. But God is waking us up. We're at a crossroad for the church, to me. And that crossroad is, and you've heard it many times, and I've been part of it, you've probably been part of it, where the most segregated hour in the U.S. and probably worldwide is 11 o'clock on Sundays. The one time we should all not be like that is the 11 o'clock hour. And so to me, the church is the answer. So my dream, my hope is that within this community of San Ramon, the churches come together. Let's just worship together, but it's not going to be just one event. I do believe that nothing's going to be resolved if it's event-oriented, but it has to be within who we are. It has to be within our DNA. And so, but it has to start somewhere. So it has to start with an event. And the event is, let's get together for community worship one evening, and let's just praise the Lord. Yeah. Different pastors, different congregations, but right here in San Ramon, let's start it. The second leg of that one, on that one thing, is also let's get involved with underprivileged kids that are here in our community. Let's adopt them. Let's show them things in life that they never get exposed to. Let's help them dream bigger. Let's be part of the solution for those kids. Let's not ignore them because they're still out there.
Yeah.
And so let's do something.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of focus on the inner city of Oakland or San Francisco. I think I just know God is telling us, all right, churches in San Ramon, you can't act like it's not here. It is here. And we have to be the ones to be the solution because we can't wait on a government.
No, I love that. And we're going to follow your lead at Eastown, and we're excited about what we don't know what we're going to do.
That's exactly right.
But we talked about in the first or second week of August, we'll keep people up to speed, whether it's on social media or on our church websites. Yes. But we're going to plan a night together where we just come and as communities. And anybody and everybody is welcome.
Absolutely.
Right? But we're kind of keeping a tab or a finger on what's happened with COVID right now, just to be safe. We know that, but we are going to do something. Even if we have to broadcast it, we have to do whatever we need to do.
Yeah. And I don't think it's optional, Clint. I think
I agree.
This is not optional because the divide of the church is a big reason we're where we are today. And so let's not be the ones that they point to.
Just change it
at the end of the day. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Man, Joel, I appreciate you so much. I appreciate you as I do. I look at you as a person that is like a mentor, and I'd follow you, man.
Yeah,
and I appreciate
it.
Yeah.
I really do appreciate this. And like I told you, you were the guy that I thought, man, I need to get this congregation to hear Clint because, I'm a black pastor being passionate about Black Lives Matter. So the congregation, of course, diverse congregation, kind of expect it. But they need to hear that I'm not the only one. They need to hear and the passion of yours, the passion of Mark over at San Ramon Presbyterian. I mean, the passion's there for these pastors, and I love it. I love it. God is doing an amazing thing in the midst of this storm.
Well, I'm on step one. If it's a 12-step program, I'm step one. But you know what? In a 12-step program, if you're on step two, you can help somebody in step one.
There you go.
If you're in step one, you can help somebody that's not.
I love it.
So I think that's the way we approach it. So keep in touch. We'll make sure to let you know what evening that we're getting together. It's either going to be here on your property or maybe even in Central Park. So
absolutely.
We'll figure that out.
We'll figure that out.
All right, God bless, bro. All right.